Now you've finished your samples and you've agreed upon a final sample of which the production run should be based off of. Now, what do you do? Hi, this is Ivan, and I talk about supply chain and branding, mainly to do with footwear, but it could be applicable to other things. So, if you're interested in that and creating your own footwear brand, then please like and subscribe and leave a comment below if you have anything else, any questions, anything you'd like me to talk about. So, your next step after you've agreed upon the samples is now discussing, or maybe you've already started discussing during the sample process, what are the terms? You're about to put the order in the factory, and it's pretty standard to do 30% upfront first for the factory to start the production, and then 70% at a later point in time. And we'll talk a little bit about where those points are in a little bit, but that's pretty standard. If you get anything like a 40, 60%, all those really depends on the product and your relationship with the factory and all that. So there's not really a right or wrong, but normally, at least in our experience in footwear, you will not get asked for 100% unless the product is already finished. So it does happen in wholesale. Sometimes what I mean by that is you're not actually asking the factory to produce anything. They already have stock, and maybe you like that stock, so you're buying it from them. That's a totally whole different thing. So we'll focus more on you're asking the factory to produce for the purpose of today. So to understand the 30-70% split, I think we need to understand it first from the factory's perspective. Now, why do they need that? Normally speaking, the 30% is mainly for material costs and maybe a little bit of labor, but they don't make money, or they're not really supposed to make money unless their margins are really that thin. But on the 70% is mainly to kind of just secure and guarantee that they won't be losing too much money on it in case after they produce you disappear, you want to cancel the order or whatnot. But so from the initial deposit, that's entirely not profitable for the factory. Now the critical point is the 70% or however is your leftover payment you need to pay them. And a lot of founders or brand owners might just think, oh, it's a payment that I have to pay them after I maybe receive the goods, or the goods leave the port, and whatever the point you guys agree upon. But one clear distinction you need to think about here is that 70% is actually your leverage. It's actually the only leverage you will have left actually after the shoes are produced, because that is something that's kind of keeping them from not really wanting to respond to you anymore. I'm not saying all factories will do that, but I'm just kind of thinking through the worst case scenario for everyone is that you paid the 70% and you get the shoes, but the quality is not there. Maybe you have some defects or whatnot. Then what can you do? What are your courses of action? Of course, there's still courses of action, but the courses of action are best taken when the shoes are still at the factory and you have not paid the 70%, because that's when the factory will pay the most attention to you. It's kind of like you taking, for lack of a better word, maybe like a hostage in that case, which it's the leftover payment. And that's when you have leverage with the factories to negotiate and talk to them. What are they going to do about the defects and things like that? And that's also why it's important to have a on the ground inspection, not just the factory inspecting their own goods, but a third party. Of course, if you can do it yourself, great. But if you can't, you have a third party there to inspect the goods based on some criteria, which we can talk a little bit later. But they will inspect it and hopefully show any defects come up while the goods are still at the factory, so they can fix it, because of course they want your leftover payment of that 70% or whatnot. And this also should be explicitly stated in any kind of contract or agreement that you have with the factory, or whether it's an email. Sometimes it's maybe just a simple email, but that constitute as a contract. Of course, contract is the best, but if you have that in writing that the required 70% is wired to them after a third party inspection and it passes a certain standard that you agree upon, both sides agree upon, then they can get that money. And sometimes maybe they push back. It's your first time with them. It's normal that factories may push back, or they're also trying to build that trust with you. And what you can potentially see if they would accept is put it in some kind of a letter of credit or escrow account, so they understand, they can see that the money is there. You're not, going to not pay them because you don't have the money. It's more like it's a process. You want to have the goods pass your standards before you can release the funds. Now, the next thing you really need to consider is the delivery date. So, what does that entail? What is on time delivery? Because there could be many things when we talk about exports that can hold up certain time frames in delivery. So, the factory, there might be material delays or some other thing, and then getting from the factory logistically to the port, and then the port, there's some customs clearance, and then bidding on the ship times are not always exact, so they will make quote something like 15 to 25 days. There's a time frame they'll quote. They're not always exact. And then getting to the port at your destination country, there's also custom clearance, might take anywhere from a couple of days to weeks, and then from there logistics to your destination warehouse or wherever you want them. So at least from the factory point of view, what constitutes on time? That when, if it's FOB, when does these goods need to get to the port of the factory country so that it can be shipped out, right? So you need to have various definitions in the contract, or again whether it's in email somewhere in writing, because for a big factory or even smaller factories, you're normally not the only client, so they might be juggling different clients and juggling capacity. And if there's a client that suddenly has a last minute rush and maybe they have been doing business with this factory for longer than you have, it's possible that they will insert the order before yours, and they will delay for a few days. So there should be some agreement on what to do there. Is it that there are some kind of late fees? Because if without any kind of understanding they could just do it and just assume you're going to accept, you should negotiate based on your ex factory date. When is it going to leave the factory, or when is it going to get to the port, so that there's a very clear understanding. Because a lot of the time when you're booking shipping from the country of origin to the destination country, you will know when the cutoff date is. So you know with them, like, oh, what is the date that the goods need to get to the port? So the FOB date you need to provide to the factory and make it very clear, and also have any kind of remedies or late fees, if you will, if they don't make that on time. So you need to figure out with them. So sometimes those late fees are a percentage of the order value, 1 to 1.5, sometimes even 2%. It really depends on your industry and what the product is. But normally there's some kind of late fees there, so penalties to make sure that it doesn't happen. Of course, both sides, also from the exporter side, doesn't hope for that to happen, because worst case scenario for everyone, especially if you're missing a shipment, it could affect your sales in your destination country due to various dates. You might have to rebook the ship, and you might not get an ideal date, and that might already push things a couple of weeks back. So the other thing you can consider is there a clause in there you want to put that if it's delayed by a certain amount, then it needs to go air freight, and does the factory pay for it, or what's the remedy there? Because of course air freight is a lot faster, but it's going to be expensive, especially if the goods that you're transporting are on the heavier side or bulkier side. Then sometimes you need to consider what the cost for air freight, and if that's a potential remedy that can kind of fix the problem, especially during holiday season. Because if you miss the holiday season, then some goods, won't be sold for a long time. So the last thing I want to talk about, and at least in the context of this video, is quality inspection standards. So what are the standards that you want to agree upon with the factory? So normally we use something called a AQL, which are acceptable quality limits, AQL, that we have, and it's in writing as well with the factory. Because since footwear itself is a highly complicated product with a lot of components, and a lot of the time there's a lot of aspects in the process of the manufacturing are still kind of handmade, so there will be a defect rate. It's not going to be 0% for sure. It's more about, okay, what is the acceptable rate, and also the remedies after it happens, depending on the level of severity. So I won't go into exactly AQL and its standards, because I feel that you can search it on Google. You'll get very detailed guides or information on it, much better than I can explain to you in a short video. The essence is that under these standards, you need to agree upon with the factory, and also provide it to your third party inspection. If you're going to use a third party on the ground inspection service, is you want to split various defects into different buckets, right? One, there's like critical ones, which are to do with safety issues with the product. It could be, for footwear, it could be completely wrong sizing labels, or sizes, or the number of sizes are incorrect, these things must be changed, remedied immediately. And then there are things that are major, maybe not critical, but still major. It could be things such as aesthetic or structural flaws on the shoe, like something that's not looking right, the shape of it, maybe the heel, crooked heel counters, or maybe the upper is tearing on shoes, things like that. And there might be minor ones, which are smaller cosmetic flaws that maybe don't affect the function. Maybe there's like some glue smudge a little bit that you see on certain shoes, or some slight thread that's coming out, which can be fixed easily. But again, you need to discuss and already have agreed upon remedy with the factory on how you will address. Is the factory just going to take those shoes and then redo them at their own expense, or what is the remedy? But again, going back, you should have those AQL standards, and what constitutes it, what's the remedy, should be agreed upon with the factory, so that they understand that if they don't remedy and fix these things as agreed upon, then you will not be liable to pay them the rest of your of the order. So to summarize, there's three things when you're talking about these aspects with the factory. The first one being that the payment terms, you have control over the payment terms, and if you don't keep the 70% or last payment as leverage, then then you're a lot less powerful, I guess, or you have a lot less solutions if issues occur after you receive the goods, or after the inspection doesn't go well. So that's something that you need to think about. And the second thing being that you need to quantify a delivery time. Now, what is on time? What is the time that they need to get to, for example, the port, if it's a FOB order, or when does it need to leave the factory if you're doing X factory and things like that? And what is the remedies if there are delays by the factory and things like that? And the last thing is to understand and set quality standards in terms of inspection. So what constitutes as a critical flaw, major flaw, minor flaw, and other things like that? And what are the remedies for these things? And, is the factory going to take the cost themselves and fix it for you? Or all these things should be agreed upon, or else you will spend more time negotiating when it happens. And again, it goes back to, it'll delay the whole shipment unless you've already talked about these things upfront and have agreed upon either in contract or an email or somewhere in writing that both sides has reference to. So hope that was useful to you guys. And again, like and subscribe and share. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I will answer them. Or if you have anything that you're interested in to talk about in terms of supply chain, or branding and footwear and things like that, let me know. And, I'll see if I can make another video about it. So thank you guys for watching.